This video is about turning a grandmother's sari into a family heirloom piece for 13 of her grandchildren. Worn at her wedding in 1944, this sari really surprised me with its color and its very unusual border design. The sari is a pure silk Banaras with pure silver jari and a very unusual pastel peach color. What was even more unusual was the border design. It had these fan-like designs and those little entwined circles. Very, very unusual of a very vintage pattern. In all my life of dealing with vintage fabric and vintage saris, I've never seen something like this, and this is what prompted me to make this video because this is such a beautiful sari and a very unique design. The sari was extremely delicate, but also in a salvageable state. At 80 years old, I could see that this sari was well loved and worn multiple times. The pallu, you can see, has a very beautiful floral motif made in pure silver. Apart from silver in the pallu area and the bottom, there was also the satin silver thread work on the sari in the parts that you tucked in. It was very thoughtful of them to not put the silver in places where you tucked it in, because silver tends to prick or bite, and all the parts that are in direct contact with your body, they were of this nice silk thread. I needed to make 13 frames out of these. So the first thing for me to do is to measure and see if I'm going to get 13 good bits. So I'm starting from the bottom because I would like the 13 bits to come from the silver jari portion. So I'm going to measure about 12 inches, mostly just for measurement's sake. This has nothing to do with how I'm going to cut it, nothing, just to understand if I'm going to get those 13 pieces or no. So what I've done here is measured about a foot, and then I'm going to use that as the guide and fold my sari into pleats. When you're handling a vintage sari, a delicate sari, you cannot be in a hurry. You have to give it time. This is actually the pace of work, because a slight rough hand and then the sari can rip off, and that's kind of heartbreaking with a sari that's so beautiful. So here is a little tip if you are going to handle a vintage sari or do something about it. Try and get a larger surface like a dining table if you don't have a studio table, and lay out a fresh cloth, tablecloth, anything, and ensure that there's nothing around you, so you don't have to juggle between stuff and your sari. So it's just you, a surface, and your sari. I'm using the stone nandi just to put some weight on it, so that when I'm handling the sari, it doesn't move. And I still cannot get over how beautiful this border design is. It has some bit of brown in it, and the body, which is the color, the silk, is so buttery. I'm sure it would have been a pleasure to wear this sari when grandmom wore it. Turning a sari into a piece of art that you can hang on the wall is such a beautiful idea, because it's absolutely unique, and nowhere in the world you are going to find a piece like that. I cringe when I come across people who don't see value in these kind of things that are a part of who they are. Imagine if your grandmom didn't get married, you wouldn't exist. So that marriage is the reason of your very existence. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 11. So I know I can get 11 to 12 pieces from the bottom side, and then of course there is the other side where there's some more silver. So I'm sure I can get about 13 to 15 pieces which are good. Some parts were really distressed, and I was hoping that I could totally avoid those and still get about 13 to 15 good pieces. When a sari is in this state of distress, unfortunately there's nothing else that you can do other than turning it into a piece of art that you don't have to handle every single day. The sari also had a fall which could pose some issues, but I will worry about that problem when I get there. The first thing I did, however, was used an old real estate catalog that I had with a thick paper and cut out an 8 by 10 size cardboard. My husband saves these random real estate catalogs from his clients, and sometimes I'm glad that I get to use it to do all these things. So I'm going to start work from the pallu side. In a lot of vintage sarees, you see that the pallus are really short. The design woven on them is really short. This one looks to me like they have cut a portion of it, but usually the pallus were short because 80, 90, 100 years ago, women got married when they were kids. So when you're 10, 12 years old, you're getting married and you're not tall enough to hold a long pallu. That's why the pallu designs were woven really small. Here is my 8 by 10 template, and there was a large rip that you saw next to the pallu. So I'm going to start work there. I'm going to try and make the pattern inside as symmetric as possible so that I don't have to cut in between these flower vines or the fans, just to make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. And I'm hoping that I'll get all the pieces. They may not be similar, but they won't be random cut out. So I'm going to put some thought into that, and I'm hoping the sari cooperates. This part really took long because I was keeping the template, taking it off, wondering what I should do. Should I use a pen and draw it out? Should I start cutting? Because until you put the first snip of scissor, you are petrified. Once you've put your scissor to the intent sari, then there's no turning back. So I was like, should I do it? Should I not do it? And I know a lot of people want to make art out of their old saris, and they have the same issue that I am having right now. That it's petrifying to actually cut into it. Here you could see a little hole, and this is the piece that I'm going to use for my sample. And for my sample piece, I've cut out a piece of fusing tape, exactly 8 by 10 size. The fusing sheet actually has a shiny side. You could hardly see it, but when you see it in person, there's a shiny side and then there's a matte side. The shiny side is what holds the glue. So you keep the fabric on top of the shiny side and then give medium heat and iron on, and the fabric should actually fuse onto the fusing sheet. So for the first sample, I was really petrified to cut the fabric directly. So what I did was I cut out the fusing sheet, put it under the sari, adjusted it where I wanted it to be. Now I'm going to put a piece of linen on top of it because I don't want the heat to directly go onto the silk. And then I have set the iron to silk, and I'm just going to iron on so that the fusing sheet fuses with the silk. I had the linen napkin folded, and then I realized that the heat was actually not transferring onto the silk. So then I used just one layer of linen, opened it again, and saw again it was fusing, but it was taking a little more time. So the silk setting on the iron is actually low heat. So since I was putting a piece of linen on top of it, the heat transferred onto the silk would be lower. So I had to slowly increase the heat to cotton and then try it again. This was actually a slow process because you don't want to suddenly increase heat and then realize that it's all shriveling or burning underneath. Slowly increase the heat and see if the sheet is fusing on. Even after finding the correct temperature, I found that the silk was fusing onto the fusing sheet, but not the zari. You can see the zari is sort of lifting off, but the silk part is completely stuck on it. Then I cut it out. After I cut it out and separated it from the sari, I again ironed it. Here again you can see most of the sari is stuck, but just the cherry part is not. But as a little piece of art, it looks beautiful, and the outcome is as desired. Now one piece was done and I have 12 more to go. After ironing it one last time, I stored it again in my trusted heavy real estate catalog. Whenever I had to lift the sari border, I had to use both hands, because if I used one hand and lifted it out and then it got too heavy, it would rip in places where it was already compromised. So there was a tiny little hole in this bit, but I was trying to see if I could salvage it by fixing it. So the rip was actually in the silk and not the zari. So if I could use a tiny piece like this and fix it at the back, I'm sure it wouldn't show that much. So I'm going to use this piece as a sample and see if that works. One thing that I have not mastered yet is doing a task that needs 100% of my focus and also shooting. So I needed to really focus on cutting this piece, so I stopped recording and focused on doing the task. Once I got a little more confident, I started re-recording. I think everyone should get their hands into DIY and doing something that absolutely terrifies them, because at the end of it you're not sure whether you'll have a great product or no to start with, but then irrespective of whether it turned out good or no, you have a very different kind of confidence level, I would say. This piece didn't camouflage as much as I thought it would, but if you see the hole, then you only see the hole. But if you didn't notice, if you're the person who doesn't notice those things, then it's fine. But for me, I knew there was a hole and I could only focus on the hole. At this point, there was a crazy wind and a crazy storm brewing outside. It's the next day, and happy to report that I have about 11 pieces and I just have to get 2 more. This is closer to the end, which is the beginning of the sari, and it was pretty distressed at this point. You can see that the threads have come off in different places. So I could probably harvest one piece from here, and then I have to go to the other side and see if I can do something there on the other side. In some places there were a lot of holes, very prominent stains. So maybe I could get one here and then see if I can get one more on the other side. The other side actually looks very, very distressed. But here I think one piece I can definitely get. So we are going to get to 13 pieces after all. Here is the part where the silver meets the silk satin thread, which looks amazing. You can see that this portion looks absolutely lovely and the silver is tarnished with age. Whoever said we were backward and uneducated 80 years ago really didn't know what they were talking about. Once I had all of my 13 pieces and I had 2 extras which were a little distressed but I could use for some experimentation, I folded up all the remaining pieces and back it went into the bag. I didn't want them exposed outside, so they went into the bag. And also if you like something, you should take care of them well. Next I ironed all the bits, and then came the part where which had the fall. Another terrifying moment, but I quickly realized that the threads were really loose and I could just use my X-Acto knife and slowly cut through them and not really harm the front of the sari. These kind of projects really teach you patience and to be focused and in the moment, because if you are off, then you've done irreparable damage. Here I am taking the front to see if there are any needle holes from removing the thread. We are all good, and I think this is another thing that was completely achievable and turned out well. The frame that I'm going to use is a teakwood frame. It's a 2-inch teakwood frame, and this is the raw teakwood. We are going to add a little stain to raise the grain. I'm not going to make it too smooth, too factory finished. It's going to look rustic, but also look nice and warm, like your old vintage furniture. So I'm using 2 different types of stain to try. This one I think is the Burma teak, and the other one was the walnut. I got a smaller frame made to test the stain. So what you see on top is the Burma teak and the bottom is the walnut. So I think we are going with the Burma teak color. Now, if you don't know how to identify teakwood and you find that somebody is trying to take you on a ride saying something is teak, here is an important tip. What you could do is scrape a little bit of teakwood and smell it. Generally, regular woods you will not get any smell, but teakwood has a very sweet, earthy, fruity kind of smell. If you smell teakwood a couple of times, then you will be able to recognize it. So if you're a wood enthusiast, I highly recommend smelling furniture or wood. Anyway, here is my finished artwork, and we have a couple of challenges, as you can see. And in the end, I'll tell you how I dealt with this challenge of having loose threads and corners not adhering to the backing sheet. But I think as a frame, as a piece of heirloom, it looks really nice. Here I have in my studio laid out all the frames. Here it is after first application of stain. You can see that each one of them is slightly a different color. That is because of the grain. Some of them were darker grain, so it turns out darker, and some of them were light, so it turns out light. So the fun part of handmade is that every single one of these pieces, the frame and the art that goes into it, is unique. Here I am. This is the back, again stained. The little ridges in which the glass goes, those are also stained. I know a lot of people tell me that you don't need to stain the back, nobody's going to look behind, and it's just going to go on a wall. But then you don't stain the back for it to look good. You stain the back to feel good about yourself. Anyway, are you prepared to see how it looks? So here we go in 3, 2, 1. So for the issue of the loose ends and the threads, I realized that there was no elegant solution to it. I could use fabric glue and stick them out, but then the fabric glue could seep into the fabric and then mess up the artwork. I could use washi tape, but washi tape is basically useless. It just sticks to paper and nothing else. So that is totally useless. That's when I realized that I could use our very own cellophane tape, and I had one that was really wide, so that is what I've used to tape the edges off. So we had just about less than half an inch that get into the frame. So I ensured that I had only that much tape on, and I got a nice clean edge on it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one.